Hi everyone. Welcome to the first video for the technical for assurance, both applicable again for people writing the challenge module exams and people writing the CFE. Okay, what I want to do is cover part number one, which is audit strategy and planning. This is probably the biggest part where I have most of the slides. This is already not so relevant, but auditing did undergo a major revision back a whole number of years ago. So there are a lot of sections. In assurance. So what I try and do is I try and really summarize the sections and go very quickly on the stuff that I think is just self-explanatory that you guys can read on your own. And then I try and add certain things as we're going through, essentially things that I think would be very, good to come up in cases to be tested. Those are typical things that I kind of dwell a little more on. Okay, so this is just kind of a breakdown here. I'm just showing you all the different topics and these sections. By the way, not that it matters so much, but everyone knows when you look at these sections, whenever you see sections that have, I don't know if I see any here, any section that has CAS 300, those were the new international standards that Canada adopted, and it's got 3 numbers for the section, and it says CAS. If you see a 4-number section, okay, with an S before it, it just says section, whatever it is, I don't know, 1515, that would be a section that was carried forward from the Canadian standards. The breakdown doesn't really matter. You guys are responsible for everything, whether it was originally in Canada then carried forward, or whether it was international standards that Canada adopted. Doesn't matter. You're responsible for all of them. But in case anybody's wondering why certain sections are CAS and then 3 numbers versus the 4 numbers, that's the distinction. I don't even see any here for 4 numbers. These are all 3-number ones. Okay. Again, doesn't really matter. All right. Let's go. So, all right, audit objectives and principles. I think the main thing here is the standard basically is reasonable assurance. We can never get absolute assurance. Okay, so this is like the overall objectives. We want to make sure everything is in accordance with the financial reporting framework. And we never get total assurance. We get reasonable assurance that the financial statements are free from material misstatement. That is the basic objective of an audit. Just some basic principles, again, obtaining reasonable assurance, which, by the way, is a high level. That is, when we're talking about an audit, that is our highest level of assurance. We give an opinion, that is our highest level. Of course, it's not absolute. The basic principles, we're going to talk about this more in one of the future sessions when we talk about professional ethics and legal liability. But a very, very important one is independence. These 5, for some reason, these ethical requirements, they seem to think are very, very important. So, okay, fine. Let me just kind of be aware of these. Again, this is going to come up. I'm going to get into more detail on this when we talk about the professional rules of ethics. Professional skepticism, okay, fine. Everybody knows that. Professional judgment. So these are just all basic stuff that, again, I'm moving quickly here because I think everybody is familiar with this, but I am following a bit of an order. It does make sense to kind of go through the principles before we get into the audit strategy and the planning. Now, keep in mind that it's not just the auditor that has these principles. Management also has certain responsibilities. We say that now, which we'll talk about when we get to reporting, we say that now for the audit report, right? Management has certain responsibilities, what they have to do. So it's not just the auditor that has the responsibility. They have to provide the auditor with certain things. So just keep in mind that management also has responsibilities. One of the things that I do in the lecture is I have these little boxes after each section. I don't normally cover them in the lecture material that I'm doing now with you, but I have it in the notes. So everybody here, that's watching this should have their binder, and you'll see this kind of at the end. This is kind of my best guess of, okay, just to really, really summarize a section, what to watch out for in multiple choice questions. I will not be covering this as we go through. It's really for you guys when you're studying, just to really help you as a little test kind of after each section to kind of look at it and what to narrow, what to clue into. Okay, I'm just explaining that I have that. And it's probably better for multiple choice questions. You'll notice here this says for multiple choice questions. That would be more applicable for the people who are watching this, the challenge exam modules. Okay. The truth is some of the concepts could come up in cases also, but I think these boxes probably are more applicable for the multiple choice questions. All right. The composition of CASs. So CASs, again, are the new standards that Canada adopted internationally. So this is basically how they're laid out. Not a big deal, very self-explanatory. You guys can read that on your own. One little interesting thing here is that it's true the auditor has to consider the entire text of the CAS to understand its requirements. Keep in mind, you don't have to know all CASs for every audit. They always try and limit our responsibility. So they say that you have to comply with all CASs that are relevant. It's a little twist. Just keep that in mind, that basically if I would say to you, there might be a tendency to answer this, do you have to know all the CASs for every audit? The answer is no. You have to only know the CASs that are relevant. They always try and limit our responsibility a little bit. Sometimes people, I don't know if that's so intuitive, sometimes people think the opposite. Oh, they're going to say we have to know everything. Of course, they're always going to say that. The answer is no. They limit our responsibility, only stuff that is relevant. Okay. Getting into planning, we're going to talk about this in a few minutes here. I'm going to get more into the terms of engagement and stuff. Identifying the real client. So people, just a quick thing, where do we identify the real client? Now you can see here there's different alternatives, right? Like who the real client is. So where do we identify the real client? So you know what the answer is? We identify the real client on the audit report or the review report, whatever the engagement is. Who do we address it to? That is the real client. Think about what we're doing. Think about what we're doing here in all these engagements. We are providing a level of assurance. We're providing a report. The real client is who we specify the report to. Now, who is not necessarily the real client? The people that pay us, the users. They're all important. I need to get paid, and we definitely have users we have to consider. But if you're looking at who is the real client, where do we identify the real client? Who's the report addressed to? That's what we're doing. We could be spending weeks and months doing an audit, and ultimately we're producing one piece of paper called the audit opinion. And who we give that to is the real client. Okay, terms of engagement is very important. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Okay, nothing really here. Again, I'm going to slow it down in a few minutes when I get into more stuff that I think is more applicable, but for now, okay, preliminary engagement, nothing really here. Developing the audit plan, okay, fine. This is all very generic. I don't think this stuff is all that important for either case writing or multiple choice. Again, don't worry, I will guide you into things that I think are important. Okay, documentation, initial engagement, fine. All right. This is a new standard, initial auditing standards. For many years, we didn't even have this standard. It's a very basic standard. Sometimes what they do is they introduce a standard into the handbook that we haven't had that we've never had before. Sometimes all they're doing is formalizing what people are doing in real life. I would say this is an example of that. Other times they add a standard and it really is new. It really is adding to the material, and it's like, oh, look, people didn't realize this. Now we have a new standard. This type of standard is more formalizing. They put this in when we adopted the international standards on initial audit standards. Some of this is so obvious. You get a new client. Who does not read if somebody else is doing the client? They have financial statements. Who does not look at the most recent financial statements? Who does not get appropriate audit evidence? So these are typical things you do on, initial auditing standards. Very, very basic stuff. Everybody knows this. Everybody's always been doing it. Just never had a handbook section on it. Okay, and audit conclusions, reporting, everyone knows if you can't get enough assurance, you're going to have to modify the report. Okay, fine. Okay. Assessing risks. So just one thing here. There is a term that you see all over the place, and that is risk assessment procedures. So that's a very popular term. Okay, we do the procedures in order to assess the risks. That is essentially what we're doing. So that you'll see come up everywhere. Understanding the entity, the environment, okay, really basic stuff. Again, I'm just going very quickly here. They do talk about in the handbook the control environment. Now they have 4 components. I guess you should know the 4 components. The control environment. These have been around forever, people. Nothing here is really new. What is a control environment? The risk assessment process. Again, those words, risk assessment, comes up even when you're dealing with internal controls. It's not only for substantive procedures. Information systems, okay, fine. Communication. This is where you get into the heavy duty, the internal controls. Okay, this is where you get into, you know, you can see here all the internal controls, authorization, the physical control, segregation of duties. That would fall under point number 3. General versus application controls, been around forever. Please know the difference. More for multiple choice than for cases. But definitely just know what they are. Nothing new, but they carry forward this into from the international standards. Okay, and the last one is monitoring of controls. So people, this is one section in the handbook, CAS 315, where they go through the internal controls. Just know the 4 basic components of how they divide up internal controls. Not very important for case writing. More important for multiple choice. Okay. Important first point and second point. First of all, we break down everything between 2 levels. Things that we do, procedures we do to gain assurance on the financial statement level versus the assertion level. So you should know the difference. I'll talk about that more in a second. With all the changes, when Canada went to the international standards, what we did not change is the general audit approach. The basic audit approach has not changed. What we do is really, we have 2 approaches, and we do either both or rely on one more than the other. We either do a substantive approach, emphasizing substantive procedures, or we do a combined approach. And the combined approach means we're going to put a lot more emphasis on the internal controls. One of the things when we adopted the international standard that has got a lot bigger and more important, and this applies to both case writing and the multiple choice, is the emphasis on internal controls. But at the end of the day, people, it's not that complicated. We got 2 basic approaches, substantive approach or a combined approach where we're doing both substantive procedures, because you always have to do some substantive procedures, as well as relying on the internal controls. That's a combined approach. Now, what's the difference between the financial statement level and the assertion level? So look at the financial statement level. This is the broader level, things that will tend to affect the financial statements. Risks that are pervasive, multiple assertions, obviously fraud, control environment. People, the control environment is the financial statement level. That's not affecting so much an individual number. That's affecting on a much broader level. The fact that if my control environment is not good, there's a higher probability there'll be errors in the financial statements. It's nowhere close to a direct linkage. Think about that. What's the control environment? You know, I don't know, things like the reporting structure. How the heck does the reporting structure lead to potential errors in the financial statements? So again, you have to kind of work your way into it. It's a much broader level. Who reports to who? If I have the wrong people reporting to the wrong, to the wrong people, and they're doing the wrong things, that could ultimately increase the chances of an error in the financial statements. It's not a direct linkage. It's a much more indirect linkage. But we say that that's very important. That's the control environment. Okay, so that's what we do at the financial statement level. At the assertion level, we're going to talk about that. That's where we look at the different assertions, the existence, the ownership, stuff like that. That's a much more direct level into what could be wrong on the financial statements.